"Can I play for a meal?" The words cut through the hum of expensive conversation and clinking glasses inside the city's most exclusive restaurant. Heads turned. Waiters froze. At the entrance stood a young black man, no older than 22, thin from hunger, his clothes torn and weathered by the streets. In his hands, a battered old guitar. The room erupted in quiet laughter. A woman in a sequined dress whispered to her date, "Is this some kind of joke?" Another guest shook his head, muttering, "Throw him out before he embarrasses the place." But the young man, his eyes tired yet steady, stepped forward. He didn't ask for money. He didn't beg. All he wanted was a plate of food, and in return, he offered the only thing he still had, his music. And now, let me turn to you. What would you do if you were sitting at that table? Would you laugh with the others, ignore him, or would you give him a chance? Tell me in the comments, because this moment will test how you see the world. The maitre d' frowned, ready to signal the guards. But before we continue, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Stories like this, raw, true, and unforgettable, deserve to be heard, and your support helps share them with more people. Back in the restaurant, the laughter grew. Someone chuckled, "A free concert for dinner? What's next? Magic tricks for dessert?" The young man tightened his grip on the guitar, his knuckles white. For a heartbeat, he looked like he might walk away. But instead, he pulled out a chair, sat in the corner of the room, and lifted the guitar into his lap. The restaurant watched with mocking curiosity. Nobody expected what was about to happen. Because when his fingers touched the strings, the night, and his entire life, began to change. His name was Jaden. 22 years old, dark skin, lean frame, eyes that carried both exhaustion and fire. To the people in the restaurant, he was just another homeless kid trying to get by. But if they knew his story, even the coldest laugh in the room might have quieted. Jaden was born in one of the roughest neighborhoods of the city. His mother, a kind woman with a quiet smile, worked double shifts cleaning houses. His father was absent most of his childhood, locked away after a string of bad choices and a prison sentence that stole years from the family. By the time Jaden was 10, he had already learned what it meant to grow up with less than everyone else. But there was one gift that changed everything. An old guitar his mother bought at a yard sale. The wood was scratched, the strings mismatched, but in Jaden's hands, it came alive. He would sit by the window of their tiny apartment, practicing for hours while the city outside blared with sirens and chaos. Music wasn't just a hobby, it was an escape. Then came the tragedies that seemed to chase him. His mother fell ill and passed away when he was 16. With no safety net, no relatives willing to take him in, Jaden drifted between shelters, odd jobs, and nights on park benches. Yet through all of it, he kept the guitar. Pause for a moment. Imagine losing everything you love, your family, your home, your future, and still clinging to one thing that makes you feel alive. For Jaden, that was music. What about you? What would be your one thing, the thing you would never let go of? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear. By the time he turned 20, Jaden was already playing on street corners. He wasn't looking for fame. He was looking for survival. Some days, people tossed him coins. Other days, they told him to move along, that he was ruining the view. But there was something undeniable in his playing. His voice carried the grit of his struggles and the hope of his dreams. A handful of people would stop, listen, even film him. Yet nothing ever came of it. The world is full of talent after all. But without a chance, talent often dies unseen. Jaden's life spiraled further when he lost the few jobs he had managed to hold. Dishwashing, delivery, construction. One by one they slipped away, replaced by longer nights on the street and shorter days filled with hunger. And yet, every morning, no matter how empty his stomach, he would pick up the guitar and play. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about survival of the soul. Now let me ask you, if you walked past someone like Jaden on the street, would you stop to listen? Would you toss a coin? Or would you hurry past, pretending not to see him? Be honest and share your answer in the comments. By the time we meet him at the restaurant, Jaden is at his lowest. His clothes are ragged, his shoes worn thin, his stomach empty for 2 days. But in his heart burns the same fire he carried as a boy, strumming on that broken guitar in a tiny apartment window. That's why he walked into that restaurant. Not just for food, not just for warmth, but because, deep down, he knew music could still save him. He just needed someone, anyone, to listen. And as he sat in that corner, guitar in hand, the laughter of strangers ringing in his ears, Jaden prepared to pour every ounce of pain and hope into the strings. The night was about to change. Morning light crept over the city skyline, spilling across cracked sidewalks and the alleys where Jaden often slept. He sat on an old milk crate near the subway entrance, clutching his guitar like it was the last piece of himself he still owned. His fingers, rough and calloused, traced the strings as he began to play. The music flowed easily, even though his stomach growled. A blues riff, soulful and raw, filled the air around him. Commuters hustled past, business suits, polished shoes, headphones on, too busy to notice. Every now and then, someone would glance, pause for a heartbeat, and then keep walking. A few tossed coins into his open guitar case, their clinks barely enough to cover a stale sandwich. Still, Jaden played, not for the coins, not for their pity, but because it was all he knew. When he sang, his voice carried everything he had lost and everything he still dreamed of. It was raspy, broken, yet powerful, the kind of voice that made you feel something, if only you stopped to listen. Let me ask you something. If you were one of those passers-by, would you stop? Would you pull out your phone and film him? Or would you keep walking, eyes down, pretending not to hear? Be honest. I want to see your answers in the comments. The hours blurred together. By afternoon, Jaden had made barely enough for a cup of coffee. As he sat on the curb, sipping it slowly, he overheard a group of teenagers laughing at him. "Yo, man, why don't you try out for some TV talent show?" One jeered. Another added, "Nah, they wouldn't even let him pass the first round." The words stung, but Jaden didn't answer. He had heard worse. What could he say? That he wasn't trying to be a star? That all he wanted was a meal, a roof, a chance to feel human again? But deep down, their laughter fueled something in him. A flicker of defiance. That evening, Jaden wandered past restaurants and cafes, watching through the glass as couples dined and families celebrated. The clinking of silverware against porcelain, the soft hum of jazz from the speakers. It felt like another world. A world that had shut its doors to him long ago. He thought of his mother, how she used to tell him, "One day, Jaden, your music will open doors that nothing else can." But so far, every door had stayed closed, until he stopped outside the city's most luxurious restaurant. Tall windows framed golden chandeliers, white tablecloths, and well-dressed guests sipping wine. Jaden stood there for a long time, his reflection mixing with the glittering world inside. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to think, what if? What if someone in there listened? What if, just once, he didn't play for coins, but for a chance? Pause here. Imagine yourself in Jaden's shoes, hungry, exhausted, ignored by the world, and suddenly staring at a place where no one like you is ever invited. Would you walk in, or would you turn away? Tell me in the comments. Jaden looked down at his guitar. The case was nearly empty, just a few scattered coins rattling at the bottom. He ran his hand over the wood, worn smooth from years of use, and exhaled. Either this works, or it doesn't, he whispered to himself. He squared his shoulders, tightened his grip, and walked toward the glowing entrance. The laughter, the humiliation, the disbelief, all of that was waiting for him. But so was the one thing he had been searching for his entire life, a chance to be heard. And that's how he ended up inside, asking for something no one expected, to trade his music for a meal. The risk of a lifetime was about to begin. The golden doors of the restaurant swung open as a pair of laughing couples exited, their coats draped over their arms. Jaden caught the scent of roasted lamb and fresh bread as the warmth of the lobby brushed against his face. His stomach clenched, reminding him he hadn't eaten properly in 2 days. He gripped his guitar a little tighter and stepped inside. The lobby was polished marble, mirrors reflecting chandeliers that sparkled overhead. Guests in designer suits and silk dresses filled the air with polite conversation. Jaden's worn sneakers squeaked against the floor, drawing eyes almost instantly. A hostess, dressed in black with a pearl necklace, froze mid-sentence as she spotted him. "Sir, can I help you?" Her tone was polite, but her eyes scanned his tattered jacket and frayed jeans. Jaden nodded, his voice low but steady. "I just want to play one song. For a meal, that's all?" Her brows furrowed, and for a moment she didn't answer. Then, as if rehearsed, she gave the tight smile of someone used to brushing people off. "I don't think that's appropriate." But Jaden had already stepped past her into the main dining hall. Picture the scene. A room glowing with golden light, every table covered in crisp linen and fine silverware. A live pianist in the corner played softly, adding to the air of wealth and exclusivity. And then, silence, as all eyes turned to the intruder. A man in a tailored grey suit muttered loudly, "What's he doing in here?" His wife covered her mouth with a hand, hiding a laugh. Another guest chuckled. "Must have gotten lost." Jaden felt the heat rise in his chest, but he pressed forward. He walked to an empty chair against the wall, sat down, and set the guitar across his lap. "Can I play one song?" His voice carried through the hall. "I don't ask for money, just a plate of food." Laughter rippled through the room. "Unbelievable," a woman in red whispered to her friend. "Go back outside," another man snapped. "Maybe he thinks he's auditioning for us," someone else sneered. "Let me pause here and ask you, what would you do if you were sitting at that table? Would you laugh like the others? Would you complain? Or would you let him play? Drop your answer in the comments, because what happens next is where everything begins to change. The maitre d' stormed toward him, his polished shoes clicking against the marble. "Sir, this is a private dining establishment. You need to leave." But Jaden raised his hand, quiet, and strummed the first chord. The sound was rough at first, a little too sharp, but it cut through the laughter like a blade. The maitre d' stopped mid-step. Jaden closed his eyes and let his fingers move. The second chord was smoother, warmer, followed by a third that carried a haunting resonance. His voice rose, shaky at first, but then deepened into a tone that silenced the jeers. Still, the mockery lingered. A man near the bar called out, "Give it up, kid." His friends snickered. The pianist in the corner frowned, insulted that his polished melodies had been interrupted. But Jaden didn't stop. He leaned into the guitar, his whole body moving with the rhythm. Every note carried years of pain, hunger, loneliness, but also hope, raw and unfiltered. By the second verse, the room had changed. The laughter dulled, a few heads tilted. The waiter who had been ready to throw him out froze, tray balanced on his hand, eyes locked on Jaden. The guests who moments earlier mocked him now found themselves listening. Jaden's voice rose again, stronger this time, as if he had finally remembered who he was. Not a beggar, not a nuisance, but a musician. And though most of the room still thought this was just a strange interruption, a spark had been lit. The boy who walked in begging for a meal was beginning to sound like something far more. The guitar strings vibrated under Jaden's fingertips, each note echoing louder than the laughter around him. For a brief moment, his courage steadied the room. But then, the tide of voices swelled again. "Enough already?" a man in a tailored navy suit barked, waving his hand like shooing away a stray dog. His wife leaned back in her chair, sipping champagne with a smirk. At another table, a young couple giggled, whispering, "Did you hear him? He thinks he's an artist. Maybe he's just hungry for attention, not food." The words stung, But Jaden kept strumming. His eyes stayed closed, his voice stronger, climbing with the melody. He poured every ounce of pain into the song. But to most of them, it was still a joke. The maitre d', red-faced now, whispered harshly to two waiters, "Escort him out now." The waiters hesitated, trays balanced in their hands, because something in Jaden's voice made them pause. Still, they moved closer, ready to grab him if needed. Let me stop here and ask you, what would you do if you were in Jaden's shoes? Would you stop playing when the crowd mocked you, or keep going until they had to listen? Write your answer in the comments. I'm curious how many of you would fight for your moment like he did. Jaden's eyes flicked open for the first time since he began playing. He saw their laughter, their disdain, and for a heartbeat, doubt crept in. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was just a hungry nobody, pretending to be a musician. But then he remembered the words his mother used to whisper. Don't play for their applause, Jaden. Play because it's who you are. He straightened in the chair, lifted his chin, and let his voice roar. The notes sharpened, clearer, stronger. His foot tapped against the marble floor, keeping rhythm, his whole body moving with the guitar. A couple of guests stopped mid-laugh. Their smiles faltered. Even the pianist, arms crossed in the corner, lowered his eyebrows, reluctantly intrigued. And yet, others pushed back harder. A man near the bar yelled, "Go beg outside where you belong." Someone else clapped mockingly, slow and sarcastic. Bravo, truly moving. For a street corner. A woman raised her phone, filming. "This'll go viral," she said, laughing to her friends. "The night we had a free comedy show at dinner." Jaden's jaw tightened, but he didn't stop. He leaned into the chords, his knuckles white against the strings, his voice cutting through their jeers like thunder. For the first time, a ripple of silence spread through part of the room. A few guests glanced at each other, unsure whether to laugh or listen. And that's the thing about truth in music. You can mock it, but you can't ignore it. The maitre d' raised his hand, about to order the waiters to drag Jaden out. But one of the waiters hesitated, whispering, "Listen, just listen." By the final chorus, the laughter had dulled. Not silenced, not yet, but dulled. A few people leaned forward in their seats, curiosity winning over arrogance. Jaden finished the song, chest rising and falling, sweat beading on his forehead. For a moment, there was only silence, and then a smattering of mocking claps, sarcastic whistles. Someone muttered, "Cute. Can we eat in peace now?" The room tilted back toward rejection. But Jaden wasn't finished. Not yet. He adjusted the guitar, cleared his throat, and prepared to play again. If they thought the first song was a fluke, the next would leave no doubt. Jaden sat straighter in the chair, his fingers trembling for only a second before settling firmly on the guitar. The laughter still echoed around him, but he no longer heard it the same way. It wasn't noise anymore. It was fuel. He struck the strings harder, sharper. The opening riff thundered through the restaurant, startling even those who were mocking him seconds ago. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. For the first time, Jaden's music was impossible to treat as background noise. The song was different this time. Gritty, raw, pulsing with rhythm. His foot tapped hard against the marble floor, his body swaying with the beat. And his voice erupted, deep and rough, but soaring. It wasn't the voice of a beggar. It was the voice of someone who had carried the weight of the world and refused to be crushed. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some still laughed, but their chuckles grew weaker, forced. The woman filming lowered her phone a little, eyes widening despite herself. A man near the piano whispered to his wife, "He sounds good." And the pianist in the corner, arms still crossed, tilted his head and muttered under his breath, "That's talent." The maitre d' hesitated. He had been ready to drag Jaden out, but now he froze, as if his authority no longer carried the same weight. Even the waiters who had stepped forward paused, trays in their hands, caught by the storm of sound coming from that battered guitar. Pause for a second and imagine this. What would you have done if you were there? Would you clap in support? Stay silent to see what happens? Or still insist he leave? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to know how many of you would side with Jaden at this moment. The song built like a fire, climbing higher and higher. By the chorus, the room had changed. The mocking voices were quiet now, replaced by an uneasy silence. People leaned forward in their chairs, captivated despite themselves. Jaden's eyes remained closed, his voice cracking with raw emotion. Every lyric carried the story of hunger, loss, and survival. It was as if the walls of the restaurant dissolved, and for a moment everyone was standing on the streets with him, feeling what he had felt. And when he hit the final note, long, piercing, alive, the silence that followed was heavy, electric. For several heartbeats, no one moved, no one spoke. Then a single pair of hands clapped, slow, deliberate. A woman at the far end of the room stood, applauding with tears in her eyes. Others glanced at her, hesitant, then began to join. Scattered claps grew louder, rolling into applause. The mocking smiles were gone. In their place were looks of surprise, respect, even admiration. Jaden opened his eyes. For the first time that night, he saw the shift. They weren't laughing now. They weren't mocking. They were listening. He lowered his guitar, chest heaving, and whispered into the room, "Thank you." Somewhere near the bar, the man who had heckled him earlier muttered, "Not bad. Not bad at all," though his pride kept him from clapping. But it didn't matter. The tide had turned. Jaden had forced the room to hear him, and they would never forget what they just witnessed. And yet, this was only the beginning. Because among those applauding sat someone who would soon change his life forever. The applause rolled across the restaurant like a wave. What had started with one woman at the far corner grew into scattered clapping, then unified rhythm, echoing off marble walls and crystal chandeliers. Jaden sat still for a moment, guitar resting on his lap, his chest heaving as he absorbed what was happening. The very same people who moments ago mocked him, laughed at him, tried to throw him out, were now clapping for him. Some even stood. A man in a tuxedo near the bar shook his head in disbelief. "Who knew?" he muttered, sipping his drink. His wife leaned forward, eyes wide, whispering, "He's incredible." And yet, Jaden didn't gloat. He didn't smirk or bow arrogantly. Instead, he adjusted the guitar strap, lifted his chin, and said softly, "One more?" The room went quiet. Not a single person objected this time. He began again, this time slower, softer, a soulful ballad that spoke of loss, of nights without warmth, of a mother's love that never truly fades. His voice cracked in places, but that only made it stronger. It was real, honest. One by one, conversations died out. Waiters froze mid-step. Guests leaned in, some placing their glasses down, afraid to disturb the fragile magic taking hold. Even the pianist in the corner uncrossed his arms, his expression shifting from disdain to reluctant respect. He whispered to himself, "The kid's got something you can't teach." Let me ask you this. What would you have felt if you were in that room? Would you still see him as a beggar? Or would you begin to realize you were witnessing something rare, something unforgettable? Tell me in the comments. I'm curious. By the second chorus, some guests had tears in their eyes. A middle-aged man wiped his face discreetly, embarrassed to be so moved. The woman who had first stood to applaud now placed her hand on her heart, whispering, "Bless him." Jaden played like his life depended on it, because in many ways it did. Every note, every lyric was carved from years of hunger, rejection, and loneliness. And the audience could feel it. They weren't just hearing music, they were hearing truth. When he finished, the room erupted again. But this time, it wasn't hesitant or scattered. It was thunderous. Applause roared, chairs scraped as people stood, And for the first time in his life, Jaden saw a room full of wealthy strangers looking at him with respect, not pity. "Encore!" someone shouted. Another voice called, "Who is this kid?" Phones were out everywhere now. Guests filmed him, capturing the night they stumbled upon something extraordinary. And that's when she noticed him. At a table near the centre sat a woman in her late 30s, elegant in a tailored white blazer, her posture confident, her expression sharp. She hadn't laughed earlier. She hadn't mocked. She had simply watched. Now she leaned toward the man beside her and whispered something, her eyes never leaving Jaden. She was more than just another guest. She was someone powerful, someone who could open doors Jaden had been banging on his whole life. But he didn't know that yet. For now, all he knew was that he was finally being heard. And for the first time in years, Jaden allowed himself to smile. The applause still echoed when Jaden lowered his guitar, resting it gently across his knees. He wasn't used to ovations. For years, his audience had been busy commuters rushing past, indifferent faces, or the occasional kind soul dropping a coin without even making eye contact. Now, dozens of well-dressed strangers stood clapping for him. The contrast was dizzying. But amid the noise, Jaden noticed her. The woman in the white blazer, mid-30s, dark hair pinned back neatly, eyes sharp but not cold. Unlike the others, she hadn't cheered too loudly or waved her hands in praise. She simply stood with a measured smile, studying him like she was seeing something no one else could. When the applause faded, she stepped forward. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as the crowd parted around her. "You're extraordinary," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "What's your name?" Jaden blinked, startled. "Jaden," he said softly. "Just Jaden." "Well, Jaden," she replied, extending a hand, "I'm Amelia Carter. I work in music." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. A few guests whispered her name, some in awe, others in disbelief. Amelia Carter wasn't just someone who worked in music. She was one of the city's most respected producers, a woman known for spotting raw talent before anyone else. Let me ask you, audience, what would you do if someone like that noticed you in your lowest moment? Would you trust her offer, or assume it was too good to be true? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know. Jaden hesitated, gripping the neck of his guitar like a lifeline. Could this really be happening? He wanted to believe it, but his entire life had taught him not to. People didn't hand out opportunities to kids from the streets, not unless they wanted something in return. Amelia must have sensed his doubt. You've got something special. Raw, real. I don't want to change that. I just want to help the world hear it. A murmur of agreement swept through the restaurant. Guests nodded, some smiling. Even the pianist in the corner finally uncrossed his arms and clapped his hands together once, reluctantly but genuinely. Jaden opened his mouth, then closed it again. He didn't know what to say. Hunger, exhaustion, fear. They all mixed with something else he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The maitre d', still hovering nearby, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Miss Carter, perhaps we should escort this man out, now that he's—" But Amelia silenced him with a single glance. "He's staying. In fact, he deserves dinner, and I'll cover it." A wave of whispers filled the air again. Jaden's eyes widened, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to laugh. Not out of arrogance, but sheer disbelief. Dinner. A meal. That's all he had asked for. And now it seemed like the universe was offering him more than food. Amelia leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I'll give you my card. Tomorrow, come by my studio. If you're serious, this could be the start of something." Jaden took the small white card with trembling hands. His reflection glimmered faintly in the gold-embossed letters. Amelia Carter, executive producer. The crowd began to disperse back to their tables, but the energy in the room had shifted. People no longer saw him as an intruder. Now they whispered his name, curious, intrigued, some even regretful for mocking him earlier. Jaden sat back, staring at the card. For the first time in years, he felt like maybe his mother's words were true. Music really could open doors. The next morning, Jaden stood outside a glass building that seemed to scrape the sky. Sunlight reflected off its mirrored surface, blinding him as he craned his neck. In one hand, he clutched his battered guitar. In the other, Amelia Carter's business card, edges bent from being held all night. He hadn't slept. He couldn't. His mind replayed the applause, her words, and the promise of a chance. But now that he was here, standing in front of a world he had only ever dreamed about, fear crept in. What if last night had been a fluke? What if they laughed again, this time louder, crueler? He drew a deep breath and pushed through the revolving doors. Inside, the lobby gleamed with polished marble and minimalist furniture. Sleek young professionals moved briskly, carrying laptops and talking into headsets. Jaden felt like an intruder again, out of place in his torn jacket and worn sneakers. The receptionist glanced up, her eyes flicking to his guitar. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone skeptical. Jaden held up the card. "Amelia Carter. She asked me to come." Her expression shifted instantly. "One moment." She picked up the phone. Minutes later, Amelia appeared at the top of the staircase, sharp in a grey pantsuit, her confidence radiating. She smiled warmly when she saw him. "Jaden, you came." "I wasn't sure if I should," he admitted. "Well, you did," she said, gesturing for him to follow. "That's the first step." She led him into the studio, a soundproofed room lined with microphones, mixing consoles, and glass windows looking into recording booths. Musicians tuned instruments. Producers scribbled notes. The hum of creativity filled the air. Jaden froze at the doorway, overwhelmed. He had played on sidewalks, in subway tunnels, in the rain and cold. But never in a place like this. "Don't be intimidated," Amelia said softly, guiding him inside. "Just be yourself. That's why you're here." "Let me ask you, audience, what would you feel in this moment? Excitement? Fear? Would you even have the courage to walk inside? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know who among you would have taken this step. Amelia introduced him to a tall man with headphones slung around his neck. "This is Marcus, one of our producers. He'll listen to you." Marcus gave Jaden a long, skeptical look. "So this is the guy from last night, the one who stopped a whole restaurant?" Jaden shifted nervously. "That was me." "Well," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, "restaurants are one thing, studios are another. Let's see what you got." He motioned to a stool in the center of the room. A microphone hung overhead. A camera recorded from the corner. Jaden's throat tightened as he sat, placing his scratched guitar on his lap. The room went quiet. All eyes on him. For a moment, Jaden thought of walking out. He thought of the laughter, the shame, the years of being told he wasn't good enough. But then he remembered the applause, Amelia's words, his mother's dream. He strummed the first chord. The sound filled the studio, richer here, clearer. His voice rose, carrying the same grit and soul as the night before, but this time with something more. Determination. Marcus leaned forward, eyebrows lifting slightly. The musicians exchanged glances. Amelia smiled. Jaden kept playing, pouring his story into every note. Hunger, loss, hope. All of it bled through the strings and into the microphone. By the time he finished, silence lingered in the room like an unspoken acknowledgement. They had heard something real. Marcus cleared his throat. "Not bad," he said, though his eyes betrayed something stronger. "Not bad at all." Amelia stepped closer, resting a hand on Jaden's shoulder. "See? I told you. You belong here." Jaden lowered his guitar, stunned. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just playing to survive. He was playing to be heard. And the world was finally starting to listen. For a moment, the studio buzzed with quiet awe. The musicians murmured to one another. Marcus scribbled notes with unusual intensity, and Amelia looked pleased. But the calm didn't last. A tall guitarist in the corner leaned against his amp, arms crossed. "So that's it," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're supposed to be impressed because he got lucky in a restaurant?" Jaden froze. The words landed like a familiar sting. The same tone he'd heard on street corners, the same mockery disguised as honesty. Marcus shot the guitarist a warning look, but another musician chimed in. "Yeah, Amelia, I mean, with all due respect, we've been grinding for years. And now some guy off the street walks in and gets your attention. Feels off." The room shifted. Some nodded. Others stayed quiet, but their silence said enough. Jaden's chest tightened. He wanted to defend himself, but the weight of their eyes pressed him down. Was this how it would always be? A fight just to be taken seriously? And here's where I want to pause and ask you, the audience. What would you do if a room full of professionals doubted you on your first day? Would you fight back with words? Or would you let your work speak for itself? Comment below. I'd love to know which path you'd take. Amelia stepped in, her voice sharp. "Enough. Talent is talent, no matter where it comes from. You all heard him. He's the real deal." But even as she defended him, Jaden felt the cold distance between himself and the rest of the room. He wasn't one of them. Not yet. Marcus cleared his throat. "All right, let's not turn this into drama. Jaden, why don't you try one more? Something different. Show us your range." Jaden nodded, though his throat tightened. He adjusted the guitar, hands shaking. The whispers behind him only made it worse. "He's not ready. Street players don't last in here. Amelia's wasting her time." Jaden closed his eyes and played. This time, the song wasn't smooth. His nerves got the better of him. His fingers slipped on the strings, his voice cracked. A couple of musicians snickered. The shame burned through him. For a second, he wanted to stop, to walk out and never come back. But then he remembered that night in the restaurant, the mocking faces, the laughter that had turned into applause. If he could win them over, he could win anyone. So he dug deeper. He pushed past the mistake, strumming harder, leaning into the rhythm. His voice rose again, cracking with raw emotion, but carrying power nonetheless. By the end, the room was silent. Not impressed, not mocking, just uncertain. Marcus finally spoke. He's rough, raw, but there's something there. One of the skeptics rolled his eyes. Something, sure, but not enough. Amelia's voice cut through like steel. "That's why we're here, to shape it, to give him the platform he deserves. If you can't see that, maybe you've forgotten what real music is." The room shifted again. No one argued after that. Jaden lowered his guitar, sweat on his brow, heart pounding. He didn't know if he had won them over, but he knew one thing. He wasn't leaving. Not this time. The studio smelled faintly of coffee and wires, the air buzzing with the hum of amps and the low chatter of engineers. For the first time in his life, Jaden sat in a professional recording booth. A glass panel separated him from the producers, their faces a blur behind the reflection of bright overhead lights. In front of him, a microphone, gleaming under the spotlight. Headphones rested on his ears, the weight unfamiliar, the silence inside pressing heavy against his chest. He looked down at his guitar, his old, battered companion, the wood worn smooth by years of street corners. This was it, the moment he had dreamed about since he was 10. Amelia's voice came through the headset, calm and reassuring. "Take your time, Jaden. Just play like you did last night. The rest will follow." He nodded, though his hands trembled. Marcus's voice followed, cooler. "Levels are set. All right, kid. Let's see what you got." Jaden strummed the first chord, but the sound cracked. His nerves betrayed him. His throat tightened, and when he tried to sing, his voice faltered, flat and unsteady. The guitarist from earlier chuckled through the glass, shaking his head. Jaden stopped, sweat breaking across his forehead. "Sorry," he muttered. Marcus leaned toward the mic, voice sharp. "You don't get second chances in this industry, kid. You either deliver or you don't. The words sliced through him. Doubt crept in fast, heavy. Maybe this was too big. Maybe he didn't belong here after all. Let me ask you this. If you were in Jaden's shoes, would you keep going? Or would you walk out before embarrassing yourself further? Comment below. I want to hear how you'd handle it. Amelia pressed the button, her voice cutting through with warmth. Ignore him. Focus on me. Jaden, play like no one's watching. Remember who you are. Her words steadied him. He thought of his mother, of nights playing under flickering streetlights, of the restaurant where strangers mocked him until the music forced them to listen. This wasn't about perfection. It was about truth. He closed his eyes, strummed again. This time, the sound was clear. The notes rang out like a heartbeat, strong and alive. His voice followed, shaky for a second, but then surging with the same raw fire that silenced a restaurant full of laughter. Marcus raised his eyebrows. The guitarist in the corner stopped smirking. The engineers leaned in closer. Jaden poured everything into the song. Hunger, pain, hope. His voice cracked, but instead of weakness, it carried power. He didn't sound polished. He sounded real. By the time he finished, silence hung heavy on the other side of the glass. Then Amelia leaned into the mic, her voice low but proud. That's it. That's what I heard last night. Even Marcus nodded slowly. Rough edges. But there's something there. Something people will feel. Jaden lowered his guitar, hands still shaking, chest heaving. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just playing for survival. He was recording a piece of his soul. As he stepped out of the booth, Amelia placed a hand on his shoulder. You just proved you belong here. Jaden looked around, at the studio, the producers, the people who had doubted him. For the first time, their eyes carried something new. Respect. And in that moment, Jaden knew this was only the beginning. 2 weeks later, Jaden sat in a coffee shop, his battered guitar leaning against the wall beside him. The cafe's old television flickered above the counter, tuned to a local news segment. At first, he wasn't paying attention, until his own voice came spilling from the speakers. He froze, nearly dropping his cup. The segment headline read, "From Streets to Studio, the voice that stopped a restaurant." And there he was. Clips from the recording session Amelia had uploaded online. Millions of views, thousands of comments. People all over the city, even across the country, had heard him. The barista behind the counter grinned. Hey, that's you, isn't it? Man, you've got pipes. Jaden blinked, his cheeks flushing. For so long, he had been invisible. Now strangers were recognizing him. On social media, the video exploded. Reactions poured in. Chills, absolute chills. This is what real music sounds like. From the streets? No way. That voice belongs on the biggest stage. He's the next legend. Remember the name? Jaden. But not all the comments were kind. This is just another charity case. He'll fade in a month. Industry chews up people like him. Overhyped. Nothing special. The mix of love and hate hit Jaden hard. Fame, even at its earliest spark, was a double-edged sword. Pause for a moment. What would you do if the whole world suddenly knew your name? Would you celebrate? Or would the pressure scare you? Drop your answers in the comments. I'm curious who would thrive and who would run. Amelia met him that afternoon, her phone buzzing non-stop with messages. Jaden, do you realize what's happening? That video has gone viral. Labels are calling me. Journalists want interviews. You're on the radar now. Jaden rubbed his temples. I don't know if I'm ready for all that. She smiled. You don't have to be ready. You just have to keep being you. That's what they're responding to. But even as she spoke, Jaden could feel the shift. The city that had ignored him was now watching. Some with admiration, some with envy, some with knives behind their smiles. That night, as he walked past the same restaurant where everything began, people pointed. Some clapped him on the back. Others whispered, "That's him." For the first time in his life, Jaden wasn't invisible, but with visibility came pressure. The restaurant guests who once laughed at him now wanted to take credit. "I was there that night. I saw him before anyone else." Industry figures who had never given him a glance suddenly wanted meetings, and critics sharpened their words, ready to tear him down. Jaden sat on a bench outside, his guitar in his lap, staring at the city lights. The noise of the world was louder than ever, but inside he carried the same thought that guided him through hunger and humiliation. Just play. Just be real. He whispered to himself, "Don't lose it. Don't lose who you are." Because as fast as the world lifted you up, it could just as quickly drag you back down. The restaurant looked the same. Golden chandeliers, polished marble, soft music humming from the grand piano in the corner. Guests in fine suits and glittering dresses filled the room, sipping champagne and laughing over their meals. But this time, Jaden wasn't walking in with torn shoes and a growling stomach. He stepped through the doors in a tailored black suit, his guitar case slung over his shoulder. The host at the front recognized him instantly, her eyes widening. "Mr. Jaden." "Welcome back," she said, her tone reverent, almost apologetic. The whispers started as soon as he entered. "That's him. The kid from the video. The star." Phones lifted, flashes popped. The same tables that once mocked him now leaned forward, desperate for his attention. Jaden didn't smirk. He didn't sneer. He simply walked to the small corner where he had once sat, when he was nothing more than a hungry stranger begging for a meal. He set down his guitar case, opened it, and pulled out the same battered instrument. The room fell silent. Let me ask you, audience, what would you feel in this moment if you were Jaden? Would you be bitter, proud, or grateful? Tell me in the comments, because this is where the story's heart truly lies. Jaden strummed a chord. The sound rang out, clear and strong, carrying not just his pain, but his triumph. He began to play, not for food, not for survival, but for the joy of being heard. His voice filled the room, rich and commanding. People who had laughed at him wiped tears from their eyes. The pianist, humbled, set his hands in his lap and listened. Even the maitre d', who once tried to throw him out, clapped quietly, his face flushed with shame. When Jaden finished, the applause shook the walls. Guests stood to their feet, cheering, clapping, some shouting his name. But Jaden only bowed his head slightly, then said, "I came here once with nothing but a guitar and a dream. You laughed, you doubted. But music doesn't need permission. It speaks the truth, whether you're ready to hear it or not." The lesson lingered in the air like smoke. Jaden didn't stay for dinner. He didn't need to. As he walked out of the restaurant, the cameras still flashing, he smiled to himself. This time, he was full. Not from food, but from purpose. On the screen, the narrator's voice closed the story. Sometimes, a single act of courage can change your life. Never underestimate the power of one moment, one song, or one choice. And never, ever laugh at someone fighting for their dream. And before the video fades, let me say this. If Jaden's story inspired you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. More stories like this deserve to be told, and your support helps keep them alive. Now I want to know, if you were in that restaurant on that first night, what would you have done? Drop your answers in the comments. Maybe your story will be the next one we share here. The screen fades to black. Music swells.